I was a struggling taxi driver, just trying to make ends meet. I picked up a heartbroken old man on his way to his wife's funeral. When we arrived, he realized he had no money to pay the fare. I saw the grief in his eyes and told him the ride was on me. After the service, he handed me a sealed envelope. I thought it was a thank you note. It wasn't. It was the deed to his mansion and a letter that would change my life forever. Before we get into the details of that rainy day, I'd love to know, what city are you watching from? Let me know in the comments, and be sure to subscribe for more stories every day. Okay, let's start that taximeter. The rain had been falling for 3 straight days, a cold, miserable drizzle that seemed to seep into the very soul of the city. For a taxi driver, rain should be a blessing, a guarantee of a busy day. For me, it just meant the streets were clogged, the fares were impatient, and the few extra dollars I might make would barely cover the rising cost of gas and the overdue bill that was sitting on my kitchen table. My life had become a relentless, grinding exercise in trying to keep my head just above water. I was at the end of a long, thankless 10-hour shift, my back aching, my mind numb from the endless loop of traffic and talk radio, when the call came in. A pickup at a quiet, respectable address in one of the older, more dignified parts of the city. The destination, Oakwood Cemetery, a full 40-minute drive across town. A long fare, a good fare. Maybe, I thought, the day wouldn't be a total loss after all. I pulled up to a beautiful old brownstone, the kind of house that spoke of quiet, generational wealth. The man who emerged was not what I expected. He was elderly, probably in his late 80s, and he was dressed in an impeccable, dark, and clearly very expensive suit. But he was not a powerful, imposing figure. He was a man hollowed out by grief. His face was pale, his eyes were red-rimmed, and he moved with the slow, fragile delicacy of a man whose entire world had just been shattered. He got into my cab without a word, just giving a small, shaky nod when I confirmed the destination. We drove in silence for the first 10 minutes, the only sound the rhythmic thump-thump of the windshield wipers, and the soft, almost imperceptible sound of the old man quietly weeping in the back seat. I was not a man who pried into the lives of my fares, but the depth of his sorrow was a tangible thing, a heavy presence in the small space of my cab. I finally broke my own rule. "I'm sorry for your loss, sir," I said softly, my eyes meeting his in the rearview mirror. He looked up, his eyes, a startlingly clear blue, full of a surprise that I had spoken at all. And then the story just seemed to pour out of him, a torrent of grief that had been held back for too long. "It's my wife," he whispered, his voice a dry, papery rasp. "My Clara. We were married for 62 years. 62 years!" He shook his head, a look of profound, childlike disbelief on his face. "I woke up this morning and I reached for her, and she was just gone. How do you say goodbye to 62 years? She was my entire world. It was always just us. We never had any children. It was just me and my Clara." He told me about her. He told me about how they had met at a dance after the war. He told me about the small business they had built together. He told me about her laugh, about the way she would arrange the flowers from her garden, and about the life they had built in that quiet brownstone. He spoke not to me, really, but to the ghost of her, to the empty space in the car beside him. And I just listened. For 40 minutes I just drove and I listened, a silent, anonymous witness to the final, beautiful, and heartbreaking chapter of a great love story. When we finally arrived at the grand wrought iron gates of Oakwood Cemetery, the rain had softened to a gentle mist, He seemed to pull himself together, straightening his suit, his face becoming a mask of stoic, formal grief. He reached into his coat pocket for his wallet, and then his face, which was already so pale, seemed to drain of all remaining color. He began to frantically pat all of his pockets, a look of fresh new horror on his face. "My wallet," he whispered, his voice a panicked, reedy thing. "Oh, my dear God, in my grief, in my haste this morning, I must have left it at home, on the dresser." He looked at me, his eyes full of a profound and deep embarrassment. "Young man," he began, his voice trembling, "I am so terribly sorry. I don't know what to say. I can't pay you." I looked at the fare displayed on the meter, $97. It was more than I had made in the last 5 hours combined. It was the money I needed for my daughter's new winter coat. It was the money for the overdue electric bill. And then I looked at the old man in my rear-view mirror, a man who was about to walk into that cemetery and bury his entire world, a man who had just lost his Clara after 62 years. I reached out, and with a single, decisive click, I turned off the meter. The $97 figure vanished. I looked at him in the mirror, and I gave him a small, genuine smile. "Don't you worry about it, sir," I said, my voice soft. "Today, this ride is on me." I sat in my taxi, my heart aching, and I watched him walk through those grand, wrought-iron gates to go and say his final goodbye. I had no idea that my simple, small act of compassion was not an ending, but a beginning. I had no idea that the choice I had just made, the choice between my own desperate need and a stranger's profound dignity, was the best and most profitable business decision of my entire life. I watched the old man, Mr. Albright, walk through the grand, wrought-iron gates of Oakwood Cemetery, a small, solitary figure in a vast, quiet landscape of stone and sorrow. My hand was still resting on the taxi meter, the place where the $97 fare had been just moments before. A part of my brain, the practical, pragmatic part that was constantly worried about my next rent payment, was screaming at me, "What did you just do? That was a whole day's earnings. Get back to work. You can't afford to be a saint." I put the car in drive, my foot hovering over the accelerator, but I couldn't do it. I looked back at the cemetery, at the lonely figure of the old man making his slow, heavy way up the winding path to a distant gravesite. He was completely and utterly alone. There were no other cars in the visitors' parking lot, no family waiting for him, just him and the priest, and 62 years of memories. And a new, more powerful thought pushed aside my financial panic. How was he going to get home? This cemetery was in a remote corner of the county, miles from the nearest bus stop. There were no other taxis waiting here. The thought of this heartbroken old man on the single worst day of his life being left stranded after burying his own wife, it was just too cruel to bear. With a sigh of resignation at my own soft heart, I pulled my taxi over to a discreet spot across the street, parked under the shade of a large oak tree, and I killed the engine. "What's another hour?" I thought to myself. "You can't just leave him here." It wasn't just about the money I had lost on the fare. It was about the money I was now actively choosing not to earn, the time I was giving away for free, all for the sake of a stranger's dignity. I waited for over an hour. I watched the small, lonely funeral from a respectful distance, a silent, anonymous observer in a yellow cab. I saw Mr. Albright standing by the graveside, his shoulders shaking. I saw the priest say his final words, make the sign of the cross. I saw the other 1 or 2 people who had been there give my passenger a brief, awkward hug, and then leave. And then he was alone. Just a small, dark figure standing over a patch of freshly turned earth. Finally, after a long, long time, he turned and began the slow, heavy walk back towards the cemetery gates. I started my engine and pulled my taxi up to the entrance, intending just to offer him a quiet, free ride back to his home.
no questions asked. But the man who walked out of those gates was not the same man who had walked in. The profound, broken grief was still there, etched into the lines on his face. But the confusion, the panicked, lost look was gone. In its place was a new, strange, and completely clear-eyed resolve. He looked like a man who had just made a final and very important decision. He walked directly to my cab and opened the back door. "Sir," I began, my voice gentle, "are you ready to go? I can take you home now." He got into the back seat and looked at me, his gaze direct and with an intensity that was almost unnerving. "Young man," he said, his voice no longer the trembling, papery rasp from before, but a quiet, firm, and steady instrument. "You have shown me a profound and unexpected kindness on what is, without a doubt, the worst day of my life. I have one final piece of business I must attend to today, a final loose end to tie up. And I find myself," he paused, his clear blue eyes seeming to look right through me, "in need of a man of good and decent character to be a witness to it." I just stared at him in the rearview mirror, completely and utterly bewildered. A witness? What on earth was he talking about? I had planned to go home and to simply fade away. But your small act of compassion has reminded me that there is still some good left in this world, and it must be rewarded. He then gave me a new address, an address in the city's most expensive and powerful financial district. "Would you do me the honor," he asked, his voice now a quiet, formal request, "of driving me to my lawyer's office?" The request was so strange, so out of place, that I couldn't even begin to process it. My passenger, the sad, lonely, and broke old man who I had been pitying, was now speaking with the quiet, confident authority of a king. But I had come this far. I couldn't say no now. "Yes, sir," I said. "Of course." I put the new address into my GPS. The screen lit up with a route that would take us to a gleaming 50-story tower of glass and steel, a building that housed the most powerful law firms and investment banks in the state. I had started my day as a simple, struggling taxi driver. Now, through a bizarre series of events, I was a good Samaritan, a confidant, and apparently a formal witness to some unknown final act. As I pulled away from the quiet, lonely cemetery and headed towards the glittering, powerful heart of the city, I had a strange and powerful feeling that this was no longer just a simple fare. I had stumbled, by complete accident, into the final, dramatic chapter of this old man's mysterious story, and I had no idea what part I was about to be asked to play. I looked at the old man in my rearview mirror, his request hanging in the air between us, as strange and as heavy as a ghost. I find myself in need of a man of good and decent character to be a witness to it. My mind raced, trying to make sense of the situation. I was a taxi driver. My job was to take people from point A to point B for a fee I had already waived. It was not to be a character witness in some unknown private legal matter for a man I had met just 2 hours ago. Every rational instinct in my body told me to politely refuse, to take him home as he had originally asked, and to get back to the familiar, uncomplicated world of my own life. But I couldn't. There was a look in his eyes, a new, clear, and powerful sense of purpose that was utterly compelling. And besides, I was already a part of his story. I had to see how it ended. "Yes, sir," I said, my voice quiet but steady. "I would be honored." The drive from the quiet green solitude of the cemetery to the hard concrete and glass heart of the city's financial district was a journey between two worlds. The silence in the cab was different now. It was not the heavy silence of grief, but an expectant, thoughtful silence. It was Mr. Albright who broke it. "Tell me about yourself, son," he said, his voice no longer that of a passenger, but of a man conducting a quiet, informal interview. "What's your name?" "Jack, sir.
Jack Riley." "Jack," he repeated, as if testing the weight of the name. "Tell me, Jack, are you a happy man?" The question was so direct, so personal, that it took me by surprise. I thought about my life, the long hours, the constant worry about money, the small rented apartment, my wife's medical bills, my daughter's dreams of a better life. "I have a family that I love very much," I answered honestly, "and that makes me happy. The rest of it, the rest is a struggle." "I understand," he said quietly. He then told me about his own life. He spoke of the vast, empty fortune he and his wife Clara had built together. He spoke of the cold, transactional world they had moved in, a world of powerful, greedy people who were their colleagues but not their friends. "We built an empire, Jack," he said, his voice full of a profound, ancient weariness. "But it was a kingdom of two, and now it is a kingdom of one, a lonely, pointless kingdom." He looked out the window at the gleaming 50-story skyscrapers that housed the city's most powerful law firms and investment banks. "I look at these buildings," he whispered, "and I see nothing but ghosts. Ghosts of deals made, of rivals crushed. There is no warmth here, no kindness." He then looked at me, his gaze intense in the rearview mirror, and he said, "Until today, your small act of kindness, your simple human decency, it was like a light being turned on in a very dark, very old room. You reminded me that the world is not just made up of people like them." He gestured to the towers of wealth around us. "It is also made up of people like you." We finally pulled up in front of the most impressive building of all, a sleek black tower of glass and steel. Sterling Tower. The name was carved in imposing letters above the grand entrance. The law firm, he told me, was on the top floor. The lobby was a cathedral of wealth, all polished marble and silent, intimidating security guards. As we walked towards the elevator, the receptionist, a woman with a look of bored, professional disdain, looked up. Her eyes widened in immediate recognition of my passenger. "Mr. Albright, sir," she exclaimed, her voice suddenly full of a fawning, almost fearful respect. "We weren't expecting you. I'll let Mr. Davies know you're on your way up immediately." We rode the express elevator to the penthouse floor in silence. I was in a world I had only ever read about, a world of unimaginable power and wealth, and I was there as the personal guest of the man who was clearly at the very top of it. The lawyer's office was even grander than the lobby. A kind-faced, silver-haired man in a perfectly tailored suit rose from behind a massive desk to greet us. "Augustus," he said, his voice full of a warm, familiar concern, "I got your message. I am so deeply sorry about Clara." He then looked at me, his expression a polite, questioning curiosity. "And you've brought a guest?" "Yes, Julian. My passenger," Mr. Albright replied. "This is Mr. Jack Riley. He is not a guest. He paused, a small wry smile on his face, "my new business partner and my new family, and he is here to be the primary witness for the final codicil to my will, the one," he said, his voice now a low, powerful command, "that you are going to draft for me right now." The lawyer, Julian Davies, stared, completely and utterly stunned. "I went to my wife's funeral today, Julian," Augustus continued, his voice now full of a strange, new, and brilliant energy. "I went there believing my life was over, that there was no goodness or decency left in the world worth rewarding. I was a rich, lonely man with a fortune that had become a curse. And then I met this young man." He turned to me. "He is a stranger. He is, by the world's standards, a poor man. He needed the $97 fare I owed him. But he saw a fellow human being in pain, and he chose compassion over commerce. He sacrificed his own earnings for the sake of my dignity on the single worst day of my life." Then he turned back to his stunned, speechless lawyer. "So I have made a decision, a final one. I am leaving the entirety of my estate, the house, the stocks,
The foundation, all of it. To the one person who has proven to me that character is a more valuable currency than money, I am leaving it all to him, to Jack. I stood there, in that magnificent, sunlit office, the entire city sprawling beneath me like a map of a world I had never been a part of, and I listened as the man I knew as Mr. Albright, Augustus Albright, calmly and with a terrifying, absolute certainty, bequeathed his entire multi-million-dollar fortune to me, the taxi driver, the stranger, the man to whom he had, just hours before, been unable to pay a $97 fare. My first reaction was a short, sharp, and hysterical bark of laughter. It just burst out of me, a completely involuntary sound of a mind that has been pushed past its breaking point. I thought it was a joke, a prank. The strange, elaborate, and cruel game of a grieving, eccentric billionaire.
"Sir, Mr. Albright, Augustus," I stammered, my face flushing with a mixture of terror and a strange, inappropriate amusement. "No, no, absolutely not. I can't. It's insane. I'm just a taxi driver. I gave you a ride. I gave you a free ride. You can't give me your entire life's fortune for that. The world doesn't work that way." The lawyer, Julian Davies, clearly agreed with me. He rushed to his client's side, his own face a mask of professional, panicked concern. "Augustus, please," he said, his voice a low, placating murmur. "This is highly irregular. You are not in a sound state of mind. You are grieving. We should take some time, a few weeks, to consider the full ramifications of such a drastic alteration to your estate." But Augustus was a rock, an immovable object of pure, unshakable conviction. He waved a dismissive hand at his own lawyer. "Julian," he said, his voice now full of a cold, hard authority, "for 30 years you have managed my money. For what? So that I could die alone in my bed and leave it all to some soulless, tax-deductible foundation? So it could be picked apart by the vulture relatives I haven't spoken to in a decade, who will suddenly appear at my funeral weeping false tears?" He shook his head, a look of profound disgust on his face. "No. My wife, Clara, and I built that fortune together. It was built on a foundation of hard work, of integrity, of a simple, decent character. And it will be passed on, in its entirety, to someone who embodies those same values." He then turned his full, formidable attention back to me. His eyes were not the eyes of a madman. They were sharp and clear, and full of a purpose so absolute it was almost terrifying. "Son," he said, his voice now softening, becoming a tool of gentle, powerful persuasion. "Don't you see? This is not a gift. This is not charity. This is a job offer, the most important and most difficult job offer of your entire life." He stood up from his chair and walked over to the grand window, looking out over the city he had conquered. "I am not giving you a pile of money so you can buy a yacht and a fast car," he said, his back to me. "I am giving you a legacy, a responsibility, a burden. I am entrusting you to be the steward of my wife's memory, of our entire life's work. I need a good, decent, and honest man for that job." He turned back from the window and looked me straight in the eye. "And in the last 3 hours, you are the only one I have found." His words, his reframing of the situation, changed everything. I had been overwhelmed, terrified by the sheer, incomprehensible scale of the money. But a job? A responsibility? A duty to honor the memory of the kind, loving woman whose funeral I had just witnessed from a distance? That was a language I could understand. I thought about my own life, the endless, grinding struggle, the constant gnawing worry about bills, the dream of giving my wife and my daughter a better, more secure future. This was not just a fortune. It was a salvation. It was a different world. I looked at the old man, at the sincere, pleading, and deeply, profoundly trusting look in his eyes. He was not just offering me his money. He was offering me his faith. And in that moment, I knew I could not, would not refuse. My own posture changed. I stood up a little straighter. The confused, stammering taxi driver was gone. "Okay, sir," I said, my voice quiet but firm, a new, strange sense of purpose settling over me. I will be the steward of your legacy. I will do my best to honor you, and to honor your wife, Clara."
A slow, brilliant, and deeply relieved smile spread across Augustus Albright's face. "I know you will, son," he whispered. "I know you will." The lawyer, Julian Davies, seeing that his client was resolute and that I had accepted, just sighed, a sound of profound, weary resignation. He went to his desk and began to draft the final, legally binding codicil to the will. I stood there, in a state of surreal, dreamlike shock, as I watched the legal architecture of my new life being constructed right before my very eyes. I, Jack Riley, a man who had started the day worried about $100 fare, was now the sole heir to a 9-figure fortune. After the documents were drafted and signed, with me acting as the witness to my own unbelievable inheritance, Augustus and I stood to leave. He looked at me, a new, almost mischievous twinkle in his eye. "Well, Jack," he said, "now that you are a man of considerable means, I assume your professional career as a taxi driver is, as of this moment, officially over." I just nodded, my mind still too numb to form a coherent thought. "Good," Augustus said, with a small, satisfied smile. "Because, as it happens, I find myself in a new and rather urgent need of a private driver and a new friend. My first request of you, as the new head of my estate, is that you do me the honor of driving me home." I looked at the billionaire who had just made me his heir. I was no longer his taxi driver, but he was, it seemed, still my passenger. And our strange, unbelievable, and now deeply intertwined journey together was only just beginning. I walked out of that gleaming 50-story tower of glass and steel, the same man who had walked in, and yet a complete and utter stranger to myself. In my pocket was the signed and notarized codicil to a will that now named me, Jack Riley, a struggling taxi driver, as the sole heir to a 9-figure fortune. And walking beside me, leaning gently on my arm for support, was the man who had just rewritten my entire existence. Augustus Albright, my passenger, my benefactor, my new and most unlikely friend. The drive back to his grand, quiet brownstone in my humble yellow taxi was the most surreal journey of my life. The city, a place I had only ever known from the perspective of a man hustling to make a living, now seemed like a different world. The people on the street, the buildings, the very air itself, it was all the same. But I was different. We didn't talk about the money, not directly. Instead, he talked about her, about Clara. He told me about the charities she had supported, the small, underfunded animal shelters and children's art programs she had poured her heart into. He spoke of his one great regret, that he had been so consumed with making money that he had never truly participated in her world of giving. "The fortune was a tool for her, Jack," he said, his voice a low, sad murmur as he looked out at the city he had once owned. "For me, it just became a way of keeping score." Then he looked at me, his gaze full of a new, heavy responsibility. "I have given you a great burden, my boy, the burden of a second chance, my chance to finally do it right." When I dropped him off at his home, he did not try to pay me. He just took my hand in his own frail old one. "I will have my lawyer, Mr. Davies, contact you in the morning to begin the formal process. And Jack," he added, his eyes full of a sincere, almost pleading warmth, "I would be very grateful if you would consider coming back tomorrow, not as a driver, but as a friend. This old house is very quiet."
I spent that night in a state of shocked, sleepless disbelief. I told my wife the entire impossible story. She, of course, thought I had lost my mind, until I showed her the copy of the legal document Mr. Davies had given me. We just sat there, in our small, cramped apartment, staring at a piece of paper that promised a future we had never, in our wildest dreams, dared to imagine. Augustus Albright passed away peacefully in his sleep 2 months later. The time I spent with him in those final weeks was a strange and profoundly beautiful gift. We were an odd pair, the reclusive, dying billionaire and the young, bewildered taxi driver. I would take him for drives in his own luxurious cars he hadn't sat in for years. We would talk for hours about his life, about my life, about the world. I was not a servant. I was not a beneficiary. I was, in the end, his last and only friend. He had spent his life surrounded by power, and yet he had died in the quiet company of kindness. The inheritance, when it came, was as real and as staggering as he had promised. I, Jack Riley, was now a man of immense wealth. But his final words to me, his description of the fortune as a burden of a second chance, had taken root in my soul. The first thing I did was not to buy a new house or a fancy car. I took the detailed list of Clara's beloved charities that Augustus had given me, and I, with the help of Mr. Davies, made a series of massive, anonymous, and transformative donations in her name, ensuring that her legacy of kindness would continue for generations. Then, I established a new foundation, the Albright Foundation. Its mission was simple: to provide grants and support to ordinary, working-class families who found themselves facing a sudden, unexpected crisis, a medical bill, a job loss, a funeral they couldn't afford. It was a foundation dedicated to providing for others the same kind of unexpected, life-altering kindness that a stranger had once shown me. It's been a year now. My wife, my daughter, and I live in a comfortable, beautiful new home. Not a mansion, but a house with a backyard, a place where my daughter can play. I no longer drive a taxi. I spend my days running the foundation, doing the most rewarding work of my life. This afternoon, I was driving home, not in my taxi, but in a simple new family car, and I saw an old, beat-up car on the side of the road, its hood up, a young, frantic-looking mother with 2 small children inside. The old me, the me who was always worried about the next fare, about the next bill, might have driven past, but the new me, the man Augustus Albright had entrusted with his legacy, did not. I pulled over. I got out of my car and walked over to her. "Trouble?" I asked with a warm smile. I know a thing or two about these old engines. As I leaned under her hood, my hands getting covered in the familiar, honest grease of a hard day's work, I thought about Augustus. I thought about how the most valuable, the most profitable, and the most life-changing fare I had ever had was the one I had given away for free. And I knew, with a certainty that was as warm and as bright as the afternoon sun, that I was finally, truly paying him back. An absolutely beautiful and heartwarming story about how a single act of kindness can change a family forever. What do you think of Augustus's final act of generosity? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were touched by this wonderful story of a second chance, please show your support by hitting that like button and be sure to subscribe for more heartwarming stories. Don't forget to click the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.